Hi, how's it going? I'm part of this. There we go. Just a quick introduction. My name is Steve Jablonsky, and I'm the creative director for Intentional Futures, which is up in the Bullitt Center, up on 15th and Madison, if you're familiar with that building. It's the living building, greenest office building in the world, the one that has composting toilets, which is pretty much where we end up. The whole thing is self-sustaining and pretty interesting building. The windows open up on their own. The blinds come down on the outside when the sun hits the building. We sort of joke that the building doesn't really care about people. It takes care of itself. But it's actually a pretty inspiring place to be and so forth. Just a little bit of my continued background. So I've been in Seattle for a little over 2 years now. I moved here from New York. I was a professor for 10 years on the East Coast. I taught at a small liberal arts college, Ramapo College of New Jersey. And I also taught in the graduate program at School of Visual Arts in Manhattan. Before that, and kind of all at the same time for parts of it, I had a design studio called Imaginary Studio. We were based out of Manhattan for a long time, originally downtown, and then up on 30th and 8th Avenue near Madison Square Garden for a long time. And it was really born out of the beginning of the web. When my graduate thesis was a CD-ROM, that's how old I am, and very quickly they were already dead by the time I had won some awards with the work, and it was all going onto the web. So I was one of like 4 guys who knew what a color palette was at the time, and so I got some web jobs. I had some freelance clients. I was also, my background is actually photography. I actually never studied design. It just kind of ended up there. So I've had a kind of a funny career. I did things backwards. I started my own studio when I was 24, something like that. And then became a professor, and then had an opportunity to come out here. My friend Michael Dix is one of the founders of Intentional Futures. We've known each other for 20 years. We lived in China together in the mid-90s, doing web work there. And so when he started this company and had an opportunity, I thought, I think it's time for a change. I gave up tenure, gave up all that stuff, decided to move out here and make a change. I've been in New York for 25 years, and it was time to hang out in the rain for a little bit more. Though I don't miss the -10 degrees or the 2 feet of snow. I lived in the Hudson Valley for the last 10 years, so we got a lot more snow than the city. Anyway, the thing I like about Intentional Futures is it's not your typical design studio. In fact, we really call ourselves a modern consultancy in the sense that much like a McKinsey or a Deloitte or someone like that, they come in and help companies really solve difficult problems. We have a really strong design component. So it's our belief that it isn't just about giving you a PowerPoint presentation with all the words that tell you what you should do. It's actually about proving those words through design. And that's a little bit what I'm going to talk about here today. And you know, I tell people that we do envisioning work, and most people go, I don't know what that is. Essentially, it's the idea that by seeing the future, you can make that happen. So let's just go through here, little contents, which are not changing. Or they are, I don't know. I can't tell this thing. I don't like PowerPoint. There we go. So we'll go through a few things, but mostly I'm going to dive into work and talk about work and show work, because this stuff is just words, and that's not really the point of my presentation. So the power of envisioning is something that I really believe in, because I feel like once you see something, it doesn't seem so like unbelievable. But it's not like the work we do isn't building robots and flying cars and the sort of sci-fi side of it, because we do a lot of work for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. What we're trying to do is imagine how we might bring poor farmers out of poverty 20 years from now. What are some technology? What are some things that, if they're in place, can help them not keep dipping below the poverty line? Are there some simple things that we can do to solve that? And by picturing that and reaching out to the right audience and inspiring people, that's where innovation comes from. So we're often at that stage where we're showing what that can look like, and innovation, with the idea of sparking people's thoughts and getting people to really get excited behind different ideas. So again, this idea that seeing the future can make it feel less daunting to achieve. I'm a big storyteller. So as a photographer originally, and then essentially a filmmaker, I believe in the story. So design is about serving that story. the emotional component, if we don't have it there, it's often academic. It's designed for design's sake. It's filmed for film's sake. I used to argue with photographers who did a lot of work about photography. I wasn't that interested, and there's a place for that, and that's fine. But for me, it was about an emotional connection. I have a fine art life separate from this that deals a lot in ambiguity, and the whole idea of what that opens up to people. And my design life is a lot more about solving problems. And this is the big thing. Don't just tell me what you mean, show me. And what I really don't like, and I'll show some examples of, is the whole see and say relationship, where someone's gone and said it, and then, hey, look, it's also on the screen, right? What I'm interested in is the fact that all of our time is valuable. And in things like presentations or in films, everything matters, and it's all intertwined. And so when there's a design component or a visual component, there's an audio component, or there's some other component that's matching that, and it's not just one to the other. If I say, like, well, we can help people get better, and then the image on the screen is like, people healthy. Okay, like we didn't need to, we got that, right? But if I say we can make people healthy and you see more specifically what that means, then we understand what you're getting at. And if it's simple or if it's something like that. And this is really linked to the importance of research. So designers forever, when it deals with brand or more of a marketing standpoint, there's tons and tons of research. Who are your competitors? What's the landscape out there? Is your business even viable? There's all that type of stuff. Well, we get into lots of research, which is on the envisioning side of things, which is, okay, it's 20 years in the future. It's poor farmers in Africa. Okay, we're starting to hone in on some parameters. What does that really look like? I literally was working on a project, and I'll show some of the film, where at one point the client was like, can't we just put like a Tesla in there? And I was like, there's not going to be a Tesla in the marketplace in this African town 20 years from now. It might be some Chinese-made electric car or whatever that maybe looks like one of those, what was that thing VW made, the Thing? It might look like that, right? But so the research is super important. So you have to understand the problem. You really have to understand your audience. You can't make something for everyone, right? If you do, it's just this watered down mess where it's like, yeah, it's either obvious or you're just kind of like, okay, yeah, So know your audience. And then ideally you're challenging assumptions. If you know that audience well enough, you know what they expect to see. And if you can play on those expectations, you can often have a bigger impact. So we do a lot of myth busting. We're a big fan of, like, especially in a film environment, I like to lead someone down a path where they think they know what's going to happen next, and then you're surprised, or it's a little bit different, or you're like, oh, I didn't know that could happen, right? So those aha moments are super important. Good design. All right. Why are words not enough? So a clear design hierarchy is super, super important. Okay. Not only do you have to know your audience, but you have to know what they need to see first. Back to that storytelling component. You don't just like look at the whole poster or look at the whole web page and be like, I got it, right? And now I'm going to counter that in a second with another part of this. But you get it because you know what to look at, and there's essentially an additive process that's happening. This plus this plus this comes together and means something. This idea of a glanceable design enables the viewer to just get it. That doesn't happen unless you have the hierarchy, unless you have that structure. That glanceability is because I knew where to go, and I wasn't like, oh, here, and then wait, no, should I look over here? Should I look over there? That glanceability is really about that first pass. And you can just breathe it. I talk a lot about designs that are breathable. Can you just kind of inhale and understand it? That's because it all added up. Right? So that's a big component here. And then successful design provides the nuance that clarifies the meaning between the lines. And this is really the crux of what Intentional Futures is all about. That's that design proving our thinking. We've done all the research, we've interviewed all the people, we're laying out the data, we're setting all that up, but actually putting it into action or putting it into some sort of form, that's okay, now I see what you mean, right? Because if I might tell you a couple of key points, you're going to see it differently, then you're going to see it differently. You start to formulate it differently in your mind. Knowing that audience, knowing how they're going to accept it or what their preconceived notions are. All those things come together, and then boom. Oh, I get what you're saying. Right? How many times have you told a story and you think it's going one way, and then they're like, oh, I had no idea you were going there. Usually it's offensive, but that's at least when I'm telling stories. So. And then we have some projects, so I'm going to quickly shift gears to show some work. So we have a couple projects, and I'll talk about a few things. This will be a time to ask questions and interrupt me as much as you like and so forth. We have a project that I was referring to in Africa, the Ag FSP Envisioning project. I know this is primarily a web class, so one of the things I've taught digital media for a long time. Again, started in web. I spent a lot of time in Flash. I'm so sad that Flash is gone. Primarily because I used to be able to develop it all by myself, and now I have to like hire people. It's kind of crap. Though I'll hire you people. I know you know what you're doing. So mobile data for development is a web project that I'll walk you through a little bit. That's how the interactive environment is actually a really powerful place for envisioning in terms of bringing some things to life. Especially we deal in a lot of data visualization stuff where there's a serious back end. We're also starting to do a lot with artificial intelligence and machine learning. And without that actual engine working and happening, it won't actually work, but we need to get to that proof of concept. So we work out all the things that, make that technology do this. So that front end presentation layer becomes super important. We've done some stuff for Microsoft, a little bit more filmmaking around the data supply chain, and that's a fun little one to walk through. Just very different design style. And then the power of data in global health. This is a mixture of some animation work that we did, and then we did a presentation for Trevor Mundell, who's at the foundation for a thing called Zurich Minds, which is kind of like a TED Talk type of thing. We've done some TED Talks in the past. We did Saul Kahn's TED Talk, and that was all before I got here. But and that's an example of how you can make a PowerPoint presentation not boring. It's also like 2 gigs because it's giant animations. But so we'll walk through a few things, and we'll see what you think. All right. Let's see if I can get this playing a little bit. I'm not sure about sound, but we'll see. Okay. Okay, so let's walk you through this a little bit. So here's a situation where understanding the audience is super important. This is not a film that is for the general public. There's a lot of stuff here that you may have looked at, maybe doesn't seem that special, maybe it's confusing even, and there's a lot of prior knowledge that's important. If I was to make this for a broader audience, there's probably going to be a voiceover. There's going to be a lot more, telling you what's happening. This is for an educated audience around this topic, because things like this idea of a device that goes into the ground, reads the soil, and sends information essentially to the cloud. That's a radical idea. Now something like this actually is being developed. You actually can read about something like that in Wired. Doesn't actually exist yet. So these are actually really heavy tent spikes that have been made to look really fancy. They're really heavy, and I had to take them all the way to Tanzania and back in a bag. So this is literally like, how many of you have seen the original Star Wars? Hopefully most of you, right? Yeah. Right. So when they're in the trash compactor, if you look really closely and there's that metal bar that's bending, it's just wrapped with bubble wrap. It's just big bubble wrap, spray painted silver. You look close enough, you can see this bubble wrap. That's basically what's going on here. We got some metal wrapped around here, we got some black tape, and we have essentially a photo version. We never really see it close up, but we did it to look real anyway. That looks like a solar panel, so that it would be powered by the solar panel. So this information, this subtle thing, for someone who understands farming in Africa and the complexities of dealing and understanding the soil, one of the things about the research that we did is that farmers have been doing this for generations. They pass it down from their parents, whatever, but there's still a lot they don't understand about how to work in a difficult soil environment. And so then we take that to the next phase where we start to see a couple of things. We see her crops. What you might not actually understand is that actually this amount of land that we are showing is a substantial plot of land. Right? That alone is actually saying something like, wow, okay, so they're owning more land, right? The fact that our main character is a woman, big part of that, right? Empowering women is certainly a big issue for the foundation. But one of the things that we're also doing here is we're showing that we're planting two different crops in the same area. These crops support each other, all right? You're growing sorghum, but the legumes actually, replenish the nitrogen and stuff that's in the soil. So there's all that stuff. All this has to be vetted. All this has to be worked out. And again, it's the idea that we know enough about the soil to know what to plant. So that's pretty radical. And then what we do is we build a whole interface. So this was a fun part. So I can't have anything looking like technology now. I can't have an iPad. I certainly don't want a Surface, even though it's the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. That's a dangerous thing, right? There's literally thousands of, hundreds of thousands of conspiracy theories around Bill Gates and wanting to take over the world, right? He's got better things to do than take over the world. So what we did is we actually designed this and had this 3D printed. So this is a 3D printed tablet, and all this is a green screen glass front end, and this is all put in post. Okay. So we built the interfaces separately. I coach my actress, click here, click there. We walk through it a few times, and then based on that tracking, we work our designs into her movement. So she's just pretending along the way. And then we're telling this other part of the story, right? For her to say like, wow, honey, wouldn't that be great for me to understand more about my soil? Like, you'd all be like, really? Come on, right? So this is just like, we're a fly on the wall. We're watching this scene come together. And we're learning about, she now knows more about her soil. She's getting information about a plot of land. That then gives recommendations of crop options, right? She selects cassava, right? Now she's picked a particular strain of the seed that's going to work well within that, because that's the whole thing. And I know in this country we get into our panties in a bunch about GMOs and things like that, and for good reason. But there is a good side of things that in difficult situations are actually helping crops grow better in harsh conditions, right? So there's some, not a heavy dose of that, but the idea that there are choices of seeds that are going to do better based on the nutrients and so forth. Okay, the fact that the young girl is going to school, huge, huge impact. They actually have enough money that she doesn't have to stay on the farm and work, right? So this all goes into the script writing ahead of time. And then there's some science and technology in the classroom. This is actually a fun little thing that actually exists. Hard to see on here, but basically it's this little microscope. You put samples on it and you lay your iPhone or your iPad on it and you can see germs. It's pretty fun. So we did it all in post so that it would look better, but that we got that guy off Kickstarter making that thing, brought it with us. Funny story about this. This is my farmer meeting. And I kind of just have them talking while I shoot. I'm just doing this camera pan, and I literally said something like, "Talk about what you had for breakfast," and then I was like, "Okay." My buddy pointed out, my producer pointed out, I was like, "They just ate ugali. That's all anybody eats for breakfast." And I was like, "That's not really going to be much of a conversation." So they all just being like, "Ugali, ugali." So I felt like a little bit like an ass when I did that. But they ended up just talking amongst themselves, and they got a great conversation going where this guy, he starts to talk about, why can't men sell chickens? And all the women are like, you can't sell chickens. That's a woman's job. That's woman's work, right? And what we later figured out is that there's this sort of rules about what men and women do on the farm as actually a protective layer. In some cases, if men blow the money, they go to town, they blow all the money on booze or whatever, and then families poor again. Like there's just there's not a saving culture. There isn't that a mechanism for that. So in many ways, it's the women have some control over the crops or the livestock and stuff that they deal with. And so I learned a lot on the shoot. That wasn't built into the script at all, but I learned a lot. The other funny thing is that in between every shot, everybody took out their cell phones. They're all on their, and I was like, yeah, put your phone away. I don't want it in the shot, and it was really funny. There's this perception that phones are, we use them as toys, we use them as, kind of frivolous thing. I mean, it's just as important to them as it is to us. It's more important. It's their main communication channel. So it was fun to work with them. I never got a really good shot of all of them. This was the best day of shooting. So everything is, we've made up this sign. She's got a little farm co-op, which we see more detail later. It's literally the smallest crew. We've got 2 camera guys, a producer. I'm in the middle of the street yelling action, and she's driving down the street. And it's just, but everybody else is just normal. They're just there. So I'm just trying to not to have them look at the camera. But the fact that she's riding a motorcycle, that she's empowered to go and actually has the time to go in and go shopping. What we do here is another part of this is the FSP part of the project, the financial services. Is she's going to make a digital purchase, right? She's paying this vendor for the goods that he's giving her, and he gets that transaction right away, right? So right after this, we see the first part of that transaction start. We created a symbol to try and understand that. He gets the payment and checks. You can't even do this now. We can't do this in this country. You pay for something, your Apple Pay or whatever, that just goes to through the credit card system. You haven't actually sent it directly. There's always a middle person. What we're actually suggesting here is that there is a digital transaction system that is more immediate, because they're dealing in much smaller amounts of cash where, credit companies aren't that interested in getting involved. So there was another version of this film that was focused primarily on the financial side of things that Bill Gates used in a presentation at a conference called Sibos, which focused on talking to the banking and the credit community and saying, hey, Bitcoin's here, all these different digital currencies, they're gonna take over. They're gonna take these 2.5 billion unbanked people, and they're going to address their needs. And so we're showing that stuff here too. So this looks maybe a little bit normal to us, but it's kind of a big deal. Another fun thing. What's behind it?
Milk. Oh, their product. Is it their product?
No. We do that a little bit later. There's a shot with the product. Refrigeration.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is rotoscoped into the shot. There's no refrigeration. There's absolutely no refrigeration. We were supposed to try and get some shots of refrigeration, and it's literally the most beat up little like like freezer things that you know if you went to your friend's cabin somewhere and you're like, okay, that's where you just kill the deer and put it, right? Like you're not getting a shot of that. So we have to put that in post. But that's a huge deal, which then we address here. And part of the visual language that we built here, the reason we introduced the symbols, we wanted to show as we're pulling out, those transactions are happening throughout this marketplace. Without that, we have to then show a whole bunch. Like, we don't need to get into that, right? We just want to get the sense of the activity going on here. So in post, just to give you a sense, all the solar panels totally put in. Retouch screen, retouch ground. We definitely, this is where they wanted the Tesla. They're like, hey, you put one right here. And I was like, I will not put a Tesla. Fun thing that you don't see when you're watching it close, but do you see anything that looks repeated? Totally. Copied over, brought over here. This actually has some really, really ugly blue tarp. And I got some kid to climb up and cut a bunch of it down. And it was great. I was like, well, let's ask him. And then he did it. But there was this huge one, which I couldn't really ask because it was probably shading half of the market. So we did it in post and we flipped it over. There was a big kind of gutter, trashy area here. This shot alone took, it probably took at least a week or so worth of time. My effects guy was like, I didn't know I was going to be doing all that. Yeah. Here, just showing the lush fields, the amount of, and back to subtle things, her working with the tractor. That's a pretty expensive piece of equipment, for the situation she's in. So she's a successful farmer. This is working really well for her. We had a whole component which we just weren't able to fit into the film without it feeling like way too much attention on it. But there's a whole like rental model here where all the farmers in the neighborhood would pitch in and essentially share equipment that's pretty expensive. And so we were trying to get into that a little bit. It was too hard to pull off in that short period of time. And then we go into her livestock a little bit so that we're also showing her value as not as a person, but her financial value as a farmer, right? She's a business, right? So we've got some dollar values to her livestock. The livestock shots were fun. I could do a whole B-roll thing on. Let's just say when you get the cows going, one of them gets frisky. Let's just say every time, every shot. It's fun. Ruined a bunch of shots. We're like, well, you can't have that in there. So here's another situation where we're trying to deal with veterinary care, and the idea that there's a chip implanted in the animal that they can track its health and the process for taking care of it. We did not actually inject the lamb. That's my favorite prop. That's just a real thing. It looks like a thing from Flash Gordon. We have that at the office, which I just kind of get a kick out of. Here's another thing that's really, really, this is actually, we had to explain this. We had to walk through, Bill through this a bunch because this is a tough sell. We all hear about droughts and how that affects crops, but actually severe rainstorms and too much rain also causes this fair amount of damage. And so we got into the topic of crop insurance. And so again, visually, we're trying to give you a sense of what's going on here, what elements are at play, and then by showing the storm, storm is all put in post and this sort of outline. What we're seeing is this line goes up. We're in drought conditions. Here's what the expectation is. And the idea of sort of predictive insurance model is that based on weather data, soil data, things like that, the value of insurance is that you get compensated for problems that happen, right? This is how people drop below the poverty line again. Something severe like that happens, they were barely above it. Now they're really set back, right? So most people don't think, poor people are worth insuring, right? There's no value there. But they actually have much more complex financial lives than anybody really understands, primarily because it's not tracked. And so in a digital environment, we know that someone's reliable, they pay their bills, it's much smaller pieces, but they're responsible. So they might be more, have insurance available and so forth. So trying to get to those issues there. And then you can kind of see the payout here. So it talks about lost yield, 15%. It's a storm-related thing, and they got, payment back in their account. That's actually pretty radical. I mean, can you imagine if that even happened here? My car got broken into. Oh, they covered it. This was the co-op. So we created this fake company, and we actually went to a cassava co-op to shoot it. So they had all the equipment. In fact, they got really nervous because they thought we were a competitor, and we had to like calm them down and be like, no, this is just fake. Like we just made this up. It's just for the film, And then they were like, they're like, why are they filming their commercial in our facility? It was pretty funny. And then again, just a quick shot of it in the marketplace so you can see that they're successfully going to market with product. And then the last thing is kind of a major deal. We break down their meal, and again, they all have pretty evenly distributed plates. Main issue here is they all have meat on their plate. That is not currently always the situation. And they're all having a balanced meal. That's kind of how we end this piece with it. So every part of this, the script, all the details, design is telling that story the whole time. Let's bring up, there we go. Okay. So this is the mobile data project. The concept here is there's a lot of powerful information in mobile data. And in the developing world, it can have a huge impact. There's privacy issues, there's all those types of things that we deal with here. But one of the things that we can do is we can learn about disease outbreaks. We can track disaster recovery information better. There's a lot of advantages. So this is sort of making the case for that. I'm going to skip over the video at this point and just get into some of the interactive. The main reason I bring this up is one of the things that's happening in interactive right now, the idea of like making websites for people, well, that's not really happening anymore. You've got Squarespace, you've got all these things. If you want your little company website or whatever, it doesn't cost you that much to have. Use one of these templates, and for most people, that's fine. So the power of interactive work and web work is actually in all the technologies. It's JavaScript, it's all these data APIs, and I don't know if, I know this is sort of an early phase class, but you've got things like 3JS, which is allowing you to import 3D, create 3D information. You have D3 out of the New York Times for data visualization. You've got a lot of really powerful tools. And so now it becomes a really viable place to actually build apps, software, dashboards. We're really hot on data dashboards. We're doing that for a bunch of clients. And so this is actually a mock version. It's not fully functioning with real data because, again, we're actually working with a group at the foundation to build something like the health minister's dashboard for Nigeria. That's a much longer project, but a lot of that thinking comes here where we've proven the case. So in the end, it's kind of a glorified slideshow, but one of the things that we're doing is that we're playing with that hierarchy, right? We have a fake country, fake names and stuff. We've got our program for malaria elimination. Here's the data around that. Here's the stuff that we're able to track. And we walk through a little story. So we've got our little word bubbles that sort of tell you what things are as you're kind of going through here. And then we get some different views. So now we're looking at clinics. Now we're getting more details. And we've got visualizations that are maybe indicating that we have more activity between these two clinics. We have less stuff going on in Clinic 3. That's crucial in terms of supply delivery and so forth. Now we're getting even more granular information about population, right? So we've got satellite data, and you're starting to see, even within these larger groups, clusters. And ideally you build an anonymized system so it's not like, hey, look, Jim, he's walking over there, right? But it's like, we've got people here, we have bodies here. Ideally in something called text sentiment analysis, the idea that somebody might be sharing information about their health. They might be, let's say the word vomit comes up in texting more, you might indicate that there's problems going on. There's an outbreak of some kind, fever, those types of things. So we're walking through what imagining a dashboard might be like for a health minister to be able to sort of track their programs, data coming in real time. And we walk through all the details there. This stuff is really, really fun. It's pretty hard to figure out, which is why it's fun. But that visualization, again, becomes crucial. How do we condense it? Again, glanceable, you say, all right, well, fever's coming up a lot more. Headaches, pretty high. And, all right, so there's not a lot of people dying, but we got a bunch of people sick, right? So what can we get from that information? We're working on an app idea that would allow people in the field, in the developing world, to be able to get some real data, primarily policymakers, so that they can use real data in decision making, and maybe compare how they're doing to other countries, their neighbors, their other countries that are similar to them, they have the same type of demographic, things like that, around healthcare. And it kind of goes through that. We have another version with disaster response. Same idea. You're seeing that there's an impact that happens. We kind of used Haiti as an example in terms of the kinds of data that was coming in and not necessarily being utilized. All right, so this is without mobile data. You might know that. With mobile data, you're going to get a lot more information about that situation. One of the things that happens in disaster recovery is typically you've got centers where materials are typically sent. It's set up in advance. But what if, what if the fault line's in a different spot and 30% of the people can't get to that spot, but you sent an even amount to all those places, then one area doesn't have enough material. Ideally, you're getting that feedback on the ground a little bit sooner and adjusting. And again, there's a lot of pivoting here in terms of without and with. Right? So we've got a whole other second layer of information, seeing that kind of stuff. All this stuff, all this animation is done via JavaScript. So again, it's that matching design with technology to achieve. It's not just about having menus come in and out or something like that, but we're trying to convey some real information. I'm a big fan of animation. I'm a big believer that the idea of something moving from point A to point B or transitioning is where that's where a lot of the story is. If it moves faster, it says one thing. If it moves slower, it says another thing. So that time element is really important. Yeah.
Would this also maybe take into consideration that there's like no power if cell towers go, cell towers go down or something as well?
Yeah, and so some of that you might actually get some of that info very quickly, where suddenly your dashboard isn't giving you information from this region. Your first thing is, okay, these people are completely out of touch for us right now, and you might know enough about your population to say like, okay, I can make some predictions over here based on that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, all that, there's infrastructure problems, there's all those types of issues. But in a lot of the developing world, that cell or satellite environment is their lifeblood, because they didn't have an underground infrastructure, they didn't have an even above ground infrastructure that was getting to the farmers, that was getting to the rural areas. That's why cellular thing has really been their leap forward in advancing them into the future. So there's a lot of power there to get that information and serve them with that. Privacy stuff, always a concern, always a challenge, but we try not to let that, we address it. There's a whole privacy section here that calls it out, but we try not to dwell on it too much, because it's just part of the problem. We'll solve it. Let's solve that and solve the rest of it. Questions before I keep prattling on? No?
I have a question about the design process.
Yeah.
So there's tremendous detail there. You must conceptually think about what is it we want to show, and then work with the designer to convey how's that visually going to be communicated like that. I'm just curious about how big is your team?
Yeah.
What's that process look like?
Surprisingly, we can work in pretty small teams because we're super collaborative. Like ideally, the designer is involved from day one, right? The producers at our office tend to have a deeper knowledge of the actual nuance of the topic. So when I've got some folks who just have a deep knowledge of global health. But typically, designers will work on similar type projects so that they can bring some of the knowledge from the last project to this project. We do a lot of wireframing. So this type of stuff, I mean, it looks nice and it's beautiful and it's colored now, but there's a lot of work in black and white. There's a lot of understanding. And then, you know, you make some aesthetic decisions, which we've shown a bunch of stuff this way. Like, we also want to keep people awake and we want to show it a different way. But ideally, there's value here. Like, it's not just picked randomly. We're looking at this. There's something that's part of the story that this is telling in a better way than a pie chart or some other type of chart, right? So that drives decision. But it's often our teams are 3 and 4 in size, with the leadership team coming in and weighing in on some conceptual work. But often I have 1 to 2 designers on a project, and then it might be a lead producer and then a junior producer that are dealing with the client, dealing with interviews and the content. Designers get frustrated if they don't have enough insight into the actual work itself. They can't make educated decisions. They can't just be like, "Oh, does it look all right?" Like, it's not, that doesn't work. You know, it's not an ad for Doritos, which is like, it needs more pop. Like, that's not what we deal with, right? It's whether that makes sense, whether that's confusing or not. And so it's tied deeply, deeply to the research. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask something similar. So, because this is something kind of like what I used to do for a bank before I was laid off back in December, like collecting the research and documenting it all. So if your company is like relatively small, how do you pick your projects to know what you're going to be passionate about to move forward and so forth?
We have 3 areas that we kind of hover in. We're open to do other stuff, but the global health and development is a huge area for us because it's complicated, and there's just a great need for that. So that's inspiring for us. There's education. We're heavily involved in kind of what's being called courseware, online education, the sort of future of education. We're a grantee of the foundation to help some folks facilitate the growth of online potential and outpatient education. That's an area that's also super complicated, and in my previous life as a professor, I know very controversial. But it's something that the reality is there that we have to solve that. And then there's technology, which does run its way through a lot of different things. But like, if McDonald's comes to us and says, like, you know, can you help us sell more burgers? We're going to be like, we're not the right shop for that, right? But we're working with Viacom right now, where they don't really understand. They have so much data about their programming, about their business, and their business is changing, right? I mean, it used to just be like, how many eyeballs would watch that show on Tuesday? Well, now it's how many recorded it and watched it within a couple of days, how many watched it later on Netflix, how many blah, 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 how much are on YouTube, how many tweeted about it. I mean, it's so much more complicated to understand if a show is successful or not. And we're working with them on building dashboards and building better visualizations to make better decisions and more informed decisions on that. So that's, again, we like to say that we like hard problems, right? If you come to us and it's sort of an obvious answer, we're kind of like, there's plenty of people who can help you with that. Oftentimes they come to us with a problem, we're like, that's not really your problem. Your problem is this other thing, which is really interesting and juicy, and then we have to convince them that we should solve that instead. So that's kind of how we do it. Cool. And we're not a discount shop because of we're in early on the research, and it's not just, you know, we have this creative brief and let's make this nice commercial. There's a lot of time spent really knowing the content and helping the client understand the content. So there's a much broader engagement on that, which just makes projects more expensive. All right, let's see here. Let's look at the 90-second version. Actually, I like this version better anyway.
Converting valuable customers into loyal customers comes from deep understanding. Being able to look into the future to offer customers what they want, when they want it. When businesses can better predict demand, they can act faster to have the right items, stocked in the right quantities, at the right time, in the right location. It requires a shift in thinking. Combining data leads to smarter, proactive decisions and uncovers new opportunities for growth. There are now more devices than people, And when they connect to each other, business transforms. It's all possible because of the power of the cloud combined with machine intelligence. It's people who make decisions. And when machine intelligence can support and augment those decisions, people can achieve more.
So similar type of thing as the Africa project, a little less dire, but I don't know if you guys are ice cream fans, but it's important to know what your next flavor might be. There's some subtle stuff going on here. One is the language that we created in terms of this data layer. And there's subtle things when these lines are going up and when they're going down. When's data coming down for her to look at? When are they sending data back up? The best example is in the farm field where you see her data kind of going up, and you're seeing the data from all the other farmers going up. We're in a situation where now people are using data in such interesting ways. New businesses are blooming. Right? I forget the name of the company now, but there are these two guys who tracked UPS delivery data to target people who were, I think it was insurance or whatever. It was basically like they could see how busy and how productive people were based on their UPS thing, and they target them for a new business that they built and were successful building that because they could follow that. I don't know if you know this, but UPS never turns left, right? So they have all that data to show them that it's much more efficient to only turn right. So they plan that. There's in Germany there are garbage trucks that they track how heavy things get and how the lack of efficiency based on weight tells them when they need to go and drop things off and get more gas per mile, things like that. So we're getting into some of that stuff with the idea that these businesses start to interact. Right. So we start with the ice cream shop. She's got a bunch of data coming in. There is social media data, tweeting. We've got traffic data in terms of people, in the neighborhoods, how much she should expect traffic to be. We've got some perk programs. It's my starring. That's my wrist. It's my 15 minutes of 15 and a half seconds. Not even. It's like 15 milliseconds of fame. And then she's looking at her inventory. Then these guys who are distribution facilities start to understand that there's more high milk fat demand, right? So they need to find a new farm that's gonna, they're at capacity right now. They don't have enough farms in their network to give them what they need. She's published all that information so that they can make that connection. This is a fun one. So this thing actually exists. This little thing on the cow. It doesn't. It does give some of this information. We made up some of it. It actually is to tell farmers when your cows are in heat. They can tell based on their movements and some of the other details when it's a good time to get busy. Yes. So. And we had another version and a longer version where we've got another soil thing that's involved there. So again, all this stuff, visual language, hierarchy to indicate information, repetition, subtle differences. We understand here that the herd health isn't as good. It's in red. We've got some different variations here. So stuff that she's publishing here.
What tools are you using for the animated overlays?
So this is all done in After Effects. This is I'm pretty sure this is trap code. I'm not sure if it's particular or one of the other plugins for that. Kind of has this helix thing going on, but we tweaked it a little bit. The other thing that's important for me is the music is all custom. Nothing. In fact, part of the reason I didn't show the video for the mobile data is because it's not custom and it sucks. It drives me crazy. But we didn't have a budget for custom music on that one, so. It's one of those things, it was fine when we used it, but now it drives me crazy. And then last, I'll just walk you through Trevor's project here a little bit, and I'll show a little bit of the video. Let's see if I can skip past intro.
Do we know how to save the world? Well, that sounds like a very grand statement, and potentially it is, but I've been thinking a lot about that for the last 4 years. And I learned a lot about the tragic Ebola epidemic in West Africa. What happened over there, we were very late to find out that there was a real problem. But when we did find out, we had a tremendous energizing and a tremendous activity. We had governments jumping in, we had the UN organizations, the World Health Organization, companies, all jumping in with a lot of resources. There was a huge amount of money to be allocated. Yes, it was chaotic.
I'm going to pause that for a second. This is an example I talked about earlier a little bit, right? He's giving some basic information about stuff. Here's what the detail is, right? He's talking about companies getting involved, governments getting involved. We're talking about some key milestones during this timeline that are important. So while you're listening to what he's saying, you're getting the detail that if he actually told you all this, that would make the speech like 30 times longer, right? So this is a one piece I'm really proud of in terms of the storytelling
It
component.
wasn't really coordinated. We got involved in August of 2014, and by December of this last year, we were able to transport some blood exchange vehicles to West Africa. And we did that by a huge Antonov transporter that was loaned to us by the World Food Program. So what did we actually get out at the end of the day? Two remarkable things when I look at it. One, we got a vaccine which was taken from early stages through to showing that it could actually prevent Ebola in 1 year. In an industry, it would take 2 to 3 years for that to happen. And then just a few weeks ago, I saw the results from the first treatment of a patient with a completely new Ebola drug. This is a completely new drug, not the ones that we've heard about. And that was taken from the start in 9 months to that drug being used in a person and working. So we had these two remarkable products that came out of the chaos, but there was a real problem and people jumped in and they were working towards the same goal, if somewhat uncoordinated. That's really not sustainable. Are there some examples which are a little bit more proactive? And we think about one. Back in the 1990s, it was clear that there were still about 12 million children under the age of 5 who were dying. And they were dying mostly from vaccine-preventable diseases in the developing world. And that's because kids in the developing world were getting less than half the number of vaccines that kids in the rich world were getting. And that led to the formation of Gavi, the Global Alliance for Vaccines, in 2000. And if we look at just one measure of what that led to, for one of the important vaccines called DTP, in 2000, we had coverage of about 47% of kids, which went up to 78% last year. That is a tremendous closing of the gap. It's still not there, but a tremendous outcome when there was a clear problem and people worked towards a goal in a coordinated fashion. So how do we go forward from here? Well, recently, we have a new framework, the Sustainable Development Goals. And if we think just about the health goal, which is number 3, then this is great, good health and well-being for everybody by 2030. And it has some tremendous goals: halve maternal mortality, halve, yet again, infant mortality. But within that framework, there really
So one of the things we're doing here, we're working with Trevor to write the speech as well. So we're working with their team on the research to know what the topics are. We're picking the examples that we think are going to illuminate the points he's trying to make, and we're back and forth with the client on that. And then we lay out this presentation that allows for that speech to happen, and he's got a little bit of control over when he's going to go to the next phase. There's a little bit of practice involved, but essentially we're animating from some point to a stopping point. And that's a transitional moment where he could prattle on about something. Trevor's great, and he knows this stuff inside us. Brilliant man. And so you can't also keep him on script, right? So we have to plan for that. And I can walk you through the presentation by itself a little bit, just to show the PowerPoint. If I can get it to open, it's huge. So, okay, so I'll sit for this so you guys can see. Anyway, so we're walking through and you've seen some of this stuff. But even just, again, talking about PowerPoint not being boring, these are all video files. Most of it's done in After Effects, but these are brought in small chunks. And then that's where the transition, I mean, you can do some transition in PowerPoint, but not like this, right? We have serious storytelling that we need to do. We've got lots of information to convey. And we have to understand that people are going to be listening and watching him, but also looking at the screen. And our experience from TED Talks show that there's a timing component there that's super important. So we've seen some of this. It's the Gavi example. And then we get into this interesting component where here is a list of diseases, here's a list of problems, and the idea that we actually have enough data to give us a sense of what's causing the most deaths, what's causing the most harm in the world, and that data is now able to, and it doesn't necessarily mean, okay, let's just focus on pneumonia, because that's clearly the biggest problem. There's a lot of interconnections here, but now we have a lot more data about the topic, and we can build models around it. So even something like malaria, what we try and do visually here is indicate there's a lot of other issues that are evolving around this one issue. Even when we zoomed in on the health issue number 3, visually we wanted to convey there's a lot of 3.5, 3. There's a lot of subpoints in there. And you're not even necessarily supposed to be like reading all that. It's more of a gesture that's important. And we zoom through malaria. Yeah, and we look at some investments here, break down, and this is a lot about the foundation and how they're investing in these different conditions. So you see polio is a big investment. Vaccines are super important. HIV, pneumonia, and the flu. So you can see some price breakdowns. Malaria, obviously, we know the foundation is super involved in malaria. This is something they kind of internally call the bubble chart. But the idea that it's a combination of probability of success and how much it costs and how many people, and then the size of the circle is how many people you're reaching and what kind of impact it's having. And so what we're theorizing here is that with all that health data, can't we, and I have to kind of, there's a whole actually video involved here as well. We're visualizing the fact that there's essentially this whole outer layer of the world that's data that we can tap into, right? We're gaining information through specific types of testing, tissue sampling. We're kind of explaining that all that data is then going into a system where we can learn more about these different issues, understand the return on investment a little bit better, and ideally this little bubble chart that we were looking at before translate into a dashboard where you might be able to say, all right, I've got 100 billion to invest. I'm going to invest it in these different areas. And based on the data and what we understand about the possible impact, I might see the world change from red to green and have a better sense of my impact. Okay, I mean, how awesome would that be? I'd be like, oh, just plug it in, world saved, cool. But
everyone's healthy.
Yeah, we're all good. There's no more death. Oh yeah, now there's a new thing, Zika. So that's actually, we're working on that presentation right now, using what we did with Ebola a little bit to also show how that mapping, how the data that we're collecting on that is super important for. And Trevor's main point here is our current situation is process is too slow. And it's not about making it into a dangerous environment, but are there some things we can learn from these crises to invest differently, to think about development in a different way? And really for us, it's about, we visualize this because you can listen to them and you can agree with them and say, that sounds great. But this hopefully puts it in your mind and lets you see it a little bit better. Your arm's gonna be killing you by the end of this. You're like holding up this. I keep looking over and I keep hoping the sun is gonna move for you. You're just like hiding from it. So. Question?
So there's a tremendous amount of data integration right now. There's tremendous big data. Does the client give you sort of the summary of that data and then you package it, or are you taking raw data and coming up with the dashboard?
So it's a mixture of this. So we work with an organization through the foundation on this stuff in particular called IHME, and they really have the largest collection of health data in the world. So we try and work with real data as much as possible, right? But ideally, it's in some form where we're not actually, there's a system that's crunched those numbers for us a little bit, and they've been, IHME literally, they have, I don't even remember what terabyte variation it is of data that they have, and the amount of computing power that it takes to deal with that. We're working with them on that app I was talking with you about in terms of health data in the field and stuff. We're working with them on the, what kind of data could we access in a quick way and make some insights on. So ideally, it's real data. We get really nervous about fake data. If it's all hand wavy and you're like, oh, we're going to do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, it makes us a little bit nervous. There are times where you have to say, but we don't then visualize it in a really precise way, right? We try and give a sense, data flying up in the cloud. Well, that's a good place for a bunch of light to shoot out of a cow and, go up to the crowd. We're not saying it's, but actually in the film of this, we have to get into that in terms of her health data. The film is another like 3 minutes, but I don't know if I can really control it so well. And that was a tricky one for us. The health data, what are we seeing? Are we really seeing her blood levels? Yeah, I don't think it's going to play. We kind of have data coming off her body, and but we don't want it to just be a bunch of like bloops and bleeps as well. So you can talk about chemical stuff, and I guess it would be like iron levels and things like that we know from the body and stuff. But it's tricky. We definitely edit a lot. We start with a lot of ideas, and then we're like, okay, well we can't really back that up. We got to pull it out. That's going to be confusing. That's controversial in ways that are actually just counterproductive to our message. And it's not that we're not going to address it, but it's actually not the point we're trying to make. So that can't be a part of the story here. It's a lot of back and forth. It's tricky. And it's not, and it's with every client. It's not foundation specific, right? Actually in Microsoft, they wanted to talk about what's called data exhaust. In data collection, and there's essentially stuff that they don't really know what to do with. It's just kind of there. And we're like, we really want to show data exhaust. So you can't show data exhaust. We're hitting people over the head with lots of information here. Stuff falling on the ground, they're just going to be like, what's happening? Is it raining? I don't know what's happening. And then we have to be like arrows pointing to it. Data exhaust. Look that up. I don't know. So, we try and clean that up and say, again, who's our audience? What are we trying to get to? We can't be everything to everybody. If you're a designer making rock posters for the club, if it's an indie rock band, you're going to design it a particular way. If it's a metal band, you're going to go a different direction, right? So all that stuff matters. And what I like about what we do, which is why I kind of dropped everything and moved across the country, is it's hard problems to solve. It's not the same thing every day. It's not how to sell a new widget. It's not how to make people eat food that's bad for them. It's how do we actually help save the world. So that's a big part of what we're trying to do. I think that's it. Oh, wait, I have a thank you. I made a thank you. I should show you the thank you. I can't even, I'll just say thank you. Any other questions or?
I don't know what I forget about all the questions.
All right, somebody else ask a question, even if it's bullshit, and then she can ask one.
I was gonna say it seems more like a UX, like a wide variety of things. So, how does someone best kind of follow in your footsteps, maybe do it the right way instead of the way you want?
Yeah, the right way. Thanks. Not that
it sounds hard.
Tried to do it. It's funny because as a teacher, for a long time, I used to spend a lot of time with designers saying, I believe you should learn code. You should understand the environment that you're designing in. And I still believe in that to a certain extent, but it's gotten much harder to do that. So there's great tools like Envision and these prototyping environments that allow you to get that concept through, prove it through design. That just allows you to have that conversation much sooner. So what I'm interested in from people doing it the right way or starting into this field is to understand what you're trying to do, and it's not just how it looks. It's really about what you're communicating, and whatever the tool is that works for that. And ideally, you're not churning your wheels or doing stuff that's actually has to be redone completely because you're trying to get to a point. We're in a much better place to do that. So even After Effects, we did some stuff. Mobile UI interface for a client. And it was for what the product might have 5 years from now. I mean, there's such a tight product cycle that it was going to have to get buy-in and then tested and all these types of things. We did it in After Effects, so they could see what it was going to do. We could get to all the details. We weren't going to program it. We weren't going to build it in Swift or whatever and make it work on a phone. You could just watch it on the phone. And then eventually we had a version we did in Envision where you could start to do it, so forth. So, when I started with this whole thing, it was like, what's the web? I don't know. Let's make stuff up, and let's charge a lot of money, And think about some of the early sites we did, and you're like, are you really charging that much? There was an old one for Batman, the movie, or whatever, that was ridiculously expensive, and I think about it now, and it's like 10 pages. But it took a long time. It was hard then. And then you had to design for AOL, which was totally different. So it's more about thinking about design differently. Where is your craft applied? And it's really strategic thinking. It's not just don't think about, I want to be a designer and I want to come in and I just want to make things look good. Ideally, you're involved in really solving something and knowing that design is actually making that true or making that happen. And that can work in a commercial environment. It can, even in a marketing environment, creating some interesting interactive experience puts that user in a place that, hey, that's pretty cool. We're now getting into VR, so that's a whole other thing. You're going to have to contend with that, which is cool. I love the VR thing. Eventually, we won't have to all be connected to our computers. Anyway, that's a whole other story. Questions?
So more question about your business model as a company. So this is a lot of really amazing, very considerable prototyping. Then let's say Viacom, for example, says, yeah, we like that idea, or Minister of Health in Nigeria. Can you build that for us?
Yeah.
Do you do it
So,
to actually produce products?
So that is ideally where we end up. One of the things that the company was built on was the Big History Project, which if you go to Intentional Futures, you can get into that. You can also go to the bighistoryproject.com. There's a public version, and then there's actually the big version that was built, which was for high schools, this new history class based on the Big Bang to now built on these 8 thresholds, and it's built around a professor in Australia. Bill Gates loved his book and loved his class, and basically was like, I think we should make this for, and so that one got built, and that's a real thing. We don't keep development and that level in-house, so we partner for those things because we don't have like a shelf of solutions that we say like, here's our app team, here's our web team. For the Microsoft project, we were actually deep in the weeds on the animation for Trevor's piece, the original film part, not just the presentation. And we didn't have enough in-house production help for that, so I farmed that out to a great group in Austin. And actually, I went down there. We shot it in Austin. We shot the whole thing, and I creative directed it with a different team. And so that's how we expand our capabilities, because they never line up all perfectly where you're like, this project's done, we can all have a beer and then we can start a new project. That doesn't happen. So, we leverage connections, especially on the development side. Development's super expensive, and unless you're having tons and tons of work coming through, people sit idle, they get bored, and then you end up having to do a lot of production work. We aren't interested in a lot of production work. We want to see that thing from the beginning. We want to build it out, and ideally, we're involved in launching something live. And those presentations are probably the biggest things that we get to, the films and things like that, because like the ag film went on the road that got shown around the world to people in the sort of industry, if you will, on that front. So yeah, we always want to. I mean, the design team, they want to make stuff. you know, we want to make apps. We're also involved right now in some incubator stuff that we're doing. So it's getting us some sort of a sprint model to designing apps and new products with some cool technologies that we have access to. So, but we're still pretty young. We're only 6. We just turned 6. So, and then it just, I'll blink my eyes and it'll be 7. We're pretty busy. Anything else?
Well, Steve, you have to come back here a second, talk about VR.
Sure. Once I make my masterpiece, which is what I'm
Sounds good.
working on. My buddy in LA is a film editor, and we're emailing daily on ideas for a VR project. So we'll see.
Thank you so much for
Thank you.